start recording again. All right, fantastic. There's our last response, I think. So, well, guys, welcome to week 4. It's hard to believe we're already at this point. It feels like the semester barely got started. And so I don't know if you guys are feeling like that or not, but it's kind of crazy. So hopefully things will settle down. Okay, couldn't get the poll to work on your end. All right, so let me put the link in the chat again. This particular question and 1 or 2 more like it are gonna have to be done like on a website. Okay, so texting into this one won't work. So that might be part of the issue. If not, I'm not sure what's going on. We may have to connect with ITSS if it continues to occur. So, but anyway, we are headed into week 4, and we're going to start really getting into we did last week, some specific rangeland content. So on week 2, you guys went through kind of the history of rangeland, and I don't know where you're at as far as how much you knew about the events in the late 1800s that really, or the last half of the 1800s that really affected rangeland and how we manage today. And so I've got a couple of questions about that as well. But then last week, you guys spent a lot of time learning about physical characteristics of rangeland. And the reason that we spend so much time on that is because it's important to know what rangeland is comprised of before we can manage it. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. That's why we spend the first few weeks kind of getting everybody up to speed, because we have folks coming in that have taken the 294 class, that haven't taken the 294 class, or that this area of science is brand new. So, all right, we got a couple more people coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and put this link in the chat one last time, and I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we will go to the next set of questions in Poll Everywhere just to get us up to speed. All right, so come on, buddy. Let's do percent. There we go. Okay, so everybody is kind of all over the board, which I'm expecting. It's week 4. Things start to get a little bit crazy here. So, all right, let's roll to this next question really quickly. So define coevolution. Again, this is coming from the week 2 material, where we learned about, prehistoric history, clear up into what we call kind of modern history. So you guys can go ahead and enter your results here, and then I'll share those with you here in just a few minutes. So we'll take a minute here to get everybody's responses in. There we go. Great. All right, guys, thank you so much for that. So here's our responses. So evolution of a species in response to characteristics of another species. Evolution of 2 species in response to a natural disaster, or evolution of an entire ecosystem in response to one management style. And so the correct answer here was selection A. So coevolution is where we actually see one species respond to the characteristics of another species. So we learned kind of the definition of this, and then we went into some more in-depth detail about what these species were. So can you guys just speak up and let's have a quick discussion about the species that we're talking about relative to coevolution on rangeland? What do you think those species were?
Weren't they along the lines of the cattle and sheep that were migrating?
Okay, so cattle and sheep that were migrating, yes, they are definitely part of that. They came a little bit later though. So think really kind of into prehistoric times. Where did we see coevolution take place? All right, so Alex in the chat is saying ruminants and grass, and yes, that is correct. So back when we had large mammals like the huge mammals grazing, they were actually evolving at the same time that the grasses were evolving. And so those two things evolved in response to the pressure that one another put on them. So the grasses were providing nutrients for the animals, but those nutrients were really, really high in fiber. Okay, so specifically a lot of lignin, and a lot of fiber materials. So at that same time, in order for those animals to evolve and continue their species, their digestive system had to change as well. So that's where we saw a digestive system of 3 to 4 compartments, or sometimes referred to as stomachs, actually exist. And so that's where our ruminant species evolved with a rumen that can handle large amounts of grass and fiber material, compared to other species that were able to capture nutrients through like seeds and berries and roots, and were able to maintain a monogastric system. So ruminants and grass is the correct answer here. So that's where we saw the grasses evolve at the same time the ruminants did. So thank you for that, guys. All right, let's roll to our next question. Okay, so what event started the rapid degradation of rangelands in the Western US? Okay, so we've got several choices here, everything from the Transcontinental Railroad Act to the range wars to Native American management using fire and pastoral grazing. So we'll take just a minute to get everybody's answers in here as well. All right, still waiting on a couple more people. We're going to take 20 more seconds. All right, let's get those last results in. Okay. All right, so let's look at our responses. So we've got a few people saying it's the Morrill Act, the Gold Rush, the cattle versus sheep wars, and then the Dust Bowl is where the majority of our selections came from. So convince me. Okay, so those of you guys that selected the Morrill Act, why do you think it was the event that started the rapid degradation of rangeland in the Western US? Nobody's wanting to defend their answer. Okay, what about Gold Rush people? Convince me that that is the event that started this degradation.
Um, I think the gold rush, it like created the demand for more livestock in the West, so that created more people wanting to graze their cattle and sheep, which in turn resulted in the degradation of the Western rangelands.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. What about the cattle versus sheep wars? There was a lot of people that selected that. So what convinced me that that was the event that started the degradation? Ooh, it's going to be a long class. Okay. Homestead Act people. You guys want to convince me that that was the event?
I said that that was the event because people came over and they were given a certain amount of land. And that is where it kind of went wrong, was all these people were coming over from the eastern side, and where that land is really plentiful because they have a lot of rain. And so I don't think that they were really prepared for how you have to manage this land. And they kind of used it and abused it, and then when they were ready to move on, they moved on. So all this land was used and abused, and then not really taken care of because they didn't think that they would keep it for a long time.
Yeah,
It was kind of just
absolutely.
a moving through thing.
Yep, absolutely. Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your participation. All right. And then our last category, Dust Bowl. So if you guys chose the Dust Bowl, convince me that that was the event that started degradation.
I think the degradation led to the Dust Bowl.
Okay. Great. So not necessarily the Dust Bowl being the start of it, but led to it. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you guys for participating in that and speaking up. It definitely helps with class interaction and active learning. So the correct answer here was actually the gold rush. Okay. So when we think about these different events, we've got to put them in chronological order. All right. So of this list here on the Poll Everywhere question, which one would be the oldest? What do you think would be the oldest list here?
The Native American management.
Yeah, exactly. Native American management. So that's going to be, it's a really general term or general categorization, but it's everything probably up to when we started seeing a ton of people come into the West. And so early 1800s-ish. Okay. All right. So then of the rest of the events on here, if we look at those timelines that were in that lecture, what would be the next major event?
Wasn't it the gold rush?
It was the gold rush, yes. And that's why the answer to this question is actually the gold rush. So the Native American management using fire and pastoral grazing, that did not cause rapid degradation of rangelands in the West, okay? They were very much in tune with the land. They knew how the land would respond to different pressures. And they had managed the land for thousands of years using these type of managerial practices. So that one, that choice here just goes away. But the rest of these events are associated with the degradation, but the one that kicked it off is the gold rush. And that is because in 1849, when they found gold at Sutter's lumber mill just outside of Sacramento, that started a whole bunch of dreaming of people on the East Coast, right? So a lot of people moved from the East Coast out to the West. They had never been out here before. They started staking claims, trying to strike it rich. And so that's where we really saw the first wave of people come to the West. And then after that, all of these other acts and stuff built upon that. So after the gold rush, what would be the next chronological event in this list?
the acts that are listed, so the railroad, Morrill, and the homestead.
Yep. So all of those happened roughly the same time, everywhere between 1960 or 1862 and 1863. Okay, and so the Transcontinental Railroad Act was definitely a part of this rangeland degradation because of why? Why would that Transcontinental Railroad Act cause rangeland degradation in the West?
The camps they set up to build all the railroads, and then once the railroad was built, then all of them shipping cattle.
Yep, shipping cattle and people, right? So it made the voyage from the east to the west coast a whole lot more feasible once that the railroad was in. Okay, so again, ease of transportation here. So that invited more people to move west. All right, the Morrill Act was an act that's actually really central to rangeland research and management, because the Morrill Act designated land and for education in each state. And so we call these the land grant systems. And so every state, California actually has 3, but every state has at least one land grant university. So in California, we have UC Davis is our major agricultural focused land grant. UC Berkeley is another land grant, and then Riverside is also a land grant. But as far as the other states around us, Oregon State is the land grant for Oregon. University of Nevada, Reno is the land grant for Nevada. And so you'll see a land grant university in every state. And their mission was threefold. It was education. So they were going to create curriculum, create universities so that people in that state could go get educated beyond basically elementary and high school. They also were tasked with conducting research for that region. And then the third leg of that is extension. So taking the new research that was used the scientific method and translating that to the producers in the state. And so that threefold mission is still alive and well today. And so the Morrill Act probably, affected rangeland degradation, but not nearly to the extent of some of the other events on this list. All right, and then the Homestead Act was another big one that was basically a land grab. So the government was giving away land in the West as long as you could prove it up, is what they called it. So you had to improve it. So you got 160 acres in the first Homestead Act, about 330 acres in the second Homestead Act, and 640 acres or a section of land in the third Homestead Act. And those were over about a 50-year period. And so that enabled a lot of people to move west. They tried, there were successful homesteads and there were a lot of non-successful homesteads, and all that goes back to the physical characteristics of the land out here in the West was much different than what they had learned or managed in the East. All right, and so the cattle versus the sheep wars really happened through the 1870s and through the 1890s, and this is where cattlemen and sheep herders were competing for the same resources on what is now, for the most part, public land. And so there was a lot of, killing animals, killing herders, booby trapping stuff. So lots of cattle versus sheep war issues during that time frame. The major turning point event that we're going to talk more in depth about in week 3 and week 4 happened in 1886, and it's not on this list, but it was a significant drought. So the drought of 1886 really pushed the rangeland over the edge to basically an irreparable position. So the land was already stressed. There was already a lot of vegetation taken off the land by animals and harvesting, exposing root systems, exposing topsoil. And with the drought in 1880, it was so bad that it really pushed the rest of the West into the management issues that we are still facing today. And so the last one on this list is the Dust Bowl. And the Dust Bowl was kind of accumulating event. It happened in the, for the most part, in the Midwest, but we saw a lot of people move to the West after that because they couldn't farm anymore through the plains. And so the Dust Bowl was a really big accumulation event. That's when the NRCS, or what was originally Soil Service, was established in 1935, and it really became a priority not only for the producers but also for the government to really conserve soil. And so anyway, just making sure that you guys have a good idea of what these events were and when they happened becomes really important with this curriculum. So just keep those type of things in mind. This is not the last time these events are going to come up in the class. All right, so let's go ahead and roll to our next question. Talking a little bit about the information last week in week 3, physical characteristics of rangeland. So the terms aspect, elevation, and slope are all associated with which of the categories listed here: precipitation, topography, temperature, or climate type. So we'll give you guys a minute to get this question answered as well. All right, about 20 seconds left. All right, go ahead and get those last responses in. Okay, let's look at what we got here. So a few people selected precipitation. The greatest amount of you selected topography. Nobody selected temperature, and climate type was a few people as well. So the correct answer here is topography. So aspect, if you recall, is actually referring to the orientation of a piece of rangeland to the sun. So this is where we see common terminology like north or south or east or west facing slopes. Okay, elevation has to do with elevation from sea level. So low elevation like in Chico, which is around 250 feet above sea level, clear up to, if we think about the Sierra Nevadas, some spots there are going to be 7,000 to 8,000 feet in elevation. And those different elevations absolutely affect the vegetation that can grow there and how animals can perform in those areas as well. And then slope, just like in math that you guys have been studying since you were probably in grammar school, has to do with the steepness of a terrain. And so all three of those collectively are topography. So we're going to talk a lot about topography in this class because it really does affect the kind and type and amount of vegetation that can grow in an area. All right, next question. All right, so multiple choice, the single most important factor that determines kind and amount of vegetation in an area. Okay, so you have 5 choices here: soil, topography, wind, precipitation, and temperature. Give you a minute here as well, although I don't think you're going to need it. You guys are rocking and rolling. All right, let's take 10 more seconds here. Get those last responses in. Okay, beautiful. Thank you guys. So yes, precipitation is absolutely the single most important factor that determines not only what kind of vegetation will grow in an area, but how much of it will grow in an area. So soil is extremely important, but if you can have the best soil in the world, and if you don't get precipitation or there isn't moisture associated with the soil for that plant to uptake, it's not going to grow at all. So precipitation is something that we're going to be talking about in almost every conversation, especially as we start stepping through the range management plan. All right, so last question for you guys. So this image is loading. You're probably not going to be able to do this one by text, but this is the drought footprint image that was in last week's physical characteristics lecture. And it has just an image of the United States from clear back from 1939 down here in the bottom right-hand corner, clear up to 2012. And so this image is a little bit outdated, but not a ton. So what I want you guys to do is, knowing what you know about rangeland, knowing what you know about the drought that we're in right now in 2021, select one of these positions and relative to how you feel this year's drought was reflected in history. So which historical drought is really representative of where we are right now? Cool, we're getting some really good varied responses, everything from 1936 or 34 levels up to 2004. Great, great, great. So while the rest of us are putting our choices in, can somebody remind us what the definition of a drought is? There was a very specific definition of a drought in last week's lecture.
It was 75% or less of the average annual growing season precipitation.
Yes, thank you so much. 75% is a really key component to that definition. And the reason that I want you guys to know and be able to memorize that definition is because for things to be classified as a drought area or show up as what on here is orange, has to be 75% or less. Or at least 75% of reduction in precipitation. And so that has several legalities with it. So that opens you up to funding if your area is technically in a drought, etc. So we've got lots of good responses here. So again, we've got a bunch around 2004, a couple in the 90s, a bunch around 1977, and one around 34, and one around 1936 as well. So let's switch gears really quickly. So let me get out of this. And I will share with you again how we're going to answer this question. So there was a link in your notes from last week about the drought monitor. So this is the most up-to-date assessment of where we're at in the drought today. So this map is released once a week. It was released last week on the 9th with data that was submitted up through the 7th. And so this is our image today. So you can see that areas that are, here's our color charts down here. So areas that are this dark cherry red or D4 are an exceptional drought. Red is D3, which is an extreme drought. We've got severe drought in orange, moderate drought in, I guess we'll call that beige. And then yellow has is abnormally dry. And so you can see a lot of the West is in this deep cherry red, or the deep red and the cherry red. And so when we look at the rest of the country, though, there's, you know, parts of the plains and especially the East Coast. If you guys have been following the news and the weather at all, you know, the East Coast is just getting pounded with rain from hurricanes. But a lot of this really has to do with the western states. So as we look at this and then flip back to our image, so let me see if I can get it to pop up there. Does anybody want to, if you can, I don't know if it'll let you re-choose your selection here. Okay, good, you can. So we'll give you just a few seconds to do that. If you want to change your answer, you can. Okay. Let's do 10 more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and lock in answers here. So thank you guys for participating. I am pretty inclined to agree with the 2004-ish image because it really captures most of the West. I would say the areas that are that weren't impacted as bad in 2004 that are really struggling right now is going to be the upper Pacific. So parts of central Oregon and central Washington, and as well as parts of Idaho or western Idaho have been weren't hit as hard in 2004 compared to where we're at now. So, but a lot of the West is really struggling right now. So as we flip back to this drought through here, we can see that we're in a pretty extreme state right now. So this the drought right now, I would say, feels worse than it did in 2015 from a producer standpoint, because you know we've been struggling personally with our ranch. Our rangeland only lasted 45 days this summer. We've been feeding cows since the end of July. And we are having to do some really unorthodox management things that we didn't have to do in 2015. So the scariest part for me as a producer and me as a scientist is if it doesn't rain this fall or this winter or this spring. So if we have a spring that was similar to last year, I don't know what we're going to do. I'm really quite worried about it, and it's going to be fairly unprecedented. We're going to have to go to even more extreme management decisions as producers. So anyway, I just want to draw your attention to the drought monitor. It is something that is always active. You guys can always check on it. It changes from week to week as well. So, all right. Yep, got to sell some cows. The problem, Kelvin, is that we already did that. So now we're trying to hang on to cows that are really, really good cows. And so we're personally, it's hitting us hard because the market is way down right now. So Orland Livestock Auction or Livestock Commission sold cull cows last week, if they were really poor condition, like they were skinny, they had just come off the range, they were old cows, broken mouth cows, sold cows for as low as 25 cents a pound. And we haven't seen those prices in years. So that's why this drought feels a little bit worse to me than it did in 2015, because we were having some really high prices at that point in time. Cull cows were marketing over $1 a pound at that point in time. So it's just hard to be in the business right now. Sheep are the same way. And we're also seeing that in quite a few of the commodity prices as well. So walnut prices are down, almond prices are down, those type of things too. So anyway, it'll be a little bit of time before we see it pop back up. All right. How do you guys feel comfort-wise with the history material and physical characteristics material? Are we feeling okay? Thumbs up, thumbs down? If you have any comments, I would love to hear them at this point. Okay. Great. All right, so everybody's feeling pretty comfortable. That is wonderful. So we are headed this week into kind of our last set of information or lecture material that I would consider introductory. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen with you. We'll jump back and take a look at Blackboard so everybody is on the same page. All right, so we are into week 4 on the Start Here module in Blackboard. And so we've got a few things going on this week. Just as a reminder, I know that wildfires, COVID is rampant in Chico right now. I have not heard any conversation about shutting the in-person component down yet. So I'm thinking that is probably some positive news. No news is good news there. If you guys do feel like you need, or would like to talk to somebody about stuff, because there's a lot of stress going on top of just trying to get through school and your day-to-day, our counseling center is really, really good. So please know that that's a resource for you. We're in the middle of today's Zoom session. We are going to have lab this week. I'm so sorry I had to cancel last week. Things got a little bit crazy with the Dixie Fire, and we had rolling power outages, and it's just no fun to try to teach class with that going on. And then, so this week we will be in lab. I encourage you, come prepared to, we're going to do a little bit of lecture. I'm going to do a short lecture at the beginning of it. Then we're going to jump into some breakout rooms and work through some management strategies to really try to cement into your mind different types of rangeland, because once we can, the biggest issue when it comes to assessing rangeland is just knowing that there's differences and beginning to identify what those differences are. And so we're going to spend some time doing that in lab this week as well. And then this week's material is all over rangelands, both here in the US. So we have about 7 to 8 different major types of rangeland in the US. And then we're also going to look at rangelands of the world too, because we see some different systems across the world, which are really cool to kind of think through when it comes to a management standpoint. And so I built in lots of pictures, lots of figures for you guys with this material. So let me see if I can just download this, and I'll give you a hint as to what you need to make sure that you have kind of memorized. There we go. All right, so rangelands of the Western US is something I need you guys to know. Okay, so this is a slide to make sure that you memorize here. So these are fairly accurate. There's some generalities here, but each color or shade of color represents a different type of rangeland that we're going to talk about this semester. So And it's really important for you guys to know that there's also rangeland in the central or the plains part of the US as well. And so that area is kind of the beef belt, right? And so we see a lot of cattle grazing on those grasslands back there. So we're going to talk about management in those systems as well. The desert Southwest, the pinyon juniper areas, we're going to cover a little bit of that as we move through the material as well. And then the Mediterranean climate or the oak woodland areas that we see in California. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that because it's closer to you guys. We have more management and more familiarity with that. So the bottom line here is make sure you guys have this map memorized by the end of the material this week, because this won't be the first time that it comes up. And then as we kind of roll back to, let's do student view. Is that student view? Oh, I'm all messed up. I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. So with the note guide, you've got, let's see, I think 1, 2, 3 online lectures about rangelands of the US and the world. And then the second set of material we're going to cover this week is rangeland soil. So you've got a note guide and then 2 online lectures about soils. And so soils, again, is really essential to the productivity of a rangeland, but also the resilience of a rangeland. So the ability to come back after some sort of catastrophic event. So, so we're going to spend some time talking about soil because it's really going to be the foundation of a lot of what we do this semester as well. And then, so there's a quiz as well that's due end of day by Friday over rangelands of the US and the world and rangeland soil. So 1 quiz with all of that material associated with it. And then I'll fill in the lab stuff a little bit later. So we'll talk through that stuff as well. All right, any questions about where we're at or where we're going this week? All right, fantastic. Well, just a couple of last comments that are of things that are happening here in the North State. So last week, if you guys were in the North State at all, we got rain and a lot of rain. It was really a blessing. And it wasn't really in the forecast. So it kind of came out of nowhere, which is even more miraculous. So it really knocked the Dixie fire back a lot. It actually saved us from having to evacuate and go gather cows that are out on rangeland right now. And it saved a couple of communities that my dad grew up in. And so the Old Station Hat Creek communities as well. So we were happy to see that. We my dad is a volunteer firefighter, so he's been covering the Cal Fire Station in Beaver for the last 8 weeks, on and off. They switch on and off, but the Cal Fire crew at that station got to come home yesterday, and so they released a lot of units because the containment had gone up so significantly because of the rain. And so that is some really, really good news on that front. The Antelope Fire was knocked back quite a bit too on kind of northeast of Mount Shasta. And then the Calder Fire was knocked back as well over on the east side in the Sierras. And so hopefully we will continue to see those fires go up in containment and down in severity. And hopefully we don't have any more start up, because we've lost a lot of land this year to fires. So some things that, or one thing that I'm involved in right now is the California Cattlemen's Association at their mid-year meeting at the end of August passed an initiative to send a letter to the U.S. Forest Service encouraging them to change their let it burn policy. So 3 weeks ago, the U.S. Forest Service, Region 5, which is all of California of the U.S. Forest Service, came out and said that they were going to continue to implement their let it burn policy, meaning that if there is a fire going and it's in a safe zone, they're going to let it continue to burn to help manage that area. And we've seen that really backfire a lot, especially in the last 2 years. So the North Complex fire, or the Bear Fire that rolled through eastern Oroville and the Daly's rangeland this time last year, was a result of one of those let it burn events. And so was the Dixie Fire. And so I'm in the process of trying to help California cattlemen's draft a letter using science. So I'm pulling literature right now that is looking at, the temperature of wildfire versus the temperature of a control burn and how they're different, and what the effects are on the vegetation and on the soil and on the wildlife and that type of thing. So I just wanted to let you guys know what's going on with that, because there's all of this stuff is real time and is happening and is very applicable to this class. So with that, that's kind of all I had for today. Thank you for joining us. And it was a pleasure to be able to kind of catch back up with you guys. I'll stay on for the next few minutes and chat. So if you guys want to hang out, that's great. If not, I will plan on seeing you on Wednesday at 2 for lab on Zoom. You're welcome. Thank you.